everybody. Welcome back to Psychedelics Today. I'm joined today by Danielle Nova. How are you today?
Hi, Joe. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you. How are you doing today?
Doing pretty great. Excited to share the podcast with you today, learn more about your work, and just share all this important stuff that you're doing with the audience. So where are you today?
I am in my home in Sebastopol, California, which is about an hour and 15 north of San Francisco.
Outstanding. I did a beautiful hotel takeover party, I think right around Bicycle Day near there. It was so fun. So excited to get back to Sonoma in the future for things like that. So let's talk high level. Let's talk about what projects you have, like super high level, and then we're going to go rewind the tape to how you got here.
Let's do it. Let's go into it.
Yeah. So you've launched a class recently with Adam. What is that class?
Yeah, we launched a new training program called the Microdosing Facilitator Training. It's North America's first 4-month training program that is led by world-leading psychedelic researchers, experts, thought leaders in the space, and clinicians. And we are training clinicians, practitioners, executive coaches how to guide their clients ethically and properly and safely through microdosing protocols.
I love that. And you do some kind of coaching and consulting work too. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Absolutely, yeah. So I've been working in the psychedelic field for almost 7 years professionally, and I work one-on-one with clients. My specialty is helping people heal from addiction. I also work with executive coaches and practitioners. I provide consultation, mentorship, as well as microdosing coaching and one-on-one psychedelic guidance.
Beautiful, beautiful. So, all right, let's rewind the tape. So, I imagine when you were in elementary school, middle school, you didn't realize you wanted to be working in psychedelics. Is that a fair guess?
By the time I was in high school, I actually knew that I wanted to be working in psychedelics. So I started using psychedelics when I was 16 years old and got really into MDMA and mushrooms, and I was big in the rave scene. I even remember doing a project in high school educating people about dance safe. And then I ended up falling deep into a path of addiction and suffering. But I would say I started off being quite the psychedelic advocate. And I remember getting quite stigmatized for that in high school. Most people weren't doing MDMA and, at a high school prom. So, but I feel like it's just such an interesting thing to look back on my history and realize that this was written in the stars already. And I needed to go through those 15 years of drug addiction to get back to where I am in the field of psychedelics.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So thanks for sharing that. And so you had some base of knowledge before having some time in addiction. Was that helpful information for you?
That's a really great question. I feel like, so in high school, I ended up having a spiritual awakening at a very young age and questioning the nature of reality and believing in unity consciousness. And I believe that psychedelics helped open up those pathways for me, because I wasn't raised from a spiritual background by any means. And it helped me feel more connected to all that there is. And I think it provided a baseline foundation for me. However, I feel like I went through a time of amnesia, forgetting that foundation that I had set because of how deeply I went into addiction.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Is there anything that's helpful to share about your addiction story before we jump into the next phase?
I would love to. Yeah, I think it's helpful to share my story with addiction because I'm not unique in the fact that I went through it, but I'm unique in the fact that I overcame it through the use of psychedelics. And I share it because there's millions of people out there that have struggled similarly to me, might currently be struggling in the ways that I struggled. So I started off feeling addicted to cocaine and methamphetamine in high school. I fell into alcohol and cannabis addiction. And then I experienced several traumas in high school that led me to having a really difficult time with my mental health. And my dad's a doctor. My mom is a counselor, and they sent me to a psychiatrist at 16 years old. And I was put on psychiatric drugs like antidepressants and sleeping medication and Adderall for focus. And by the time I graduated high school, I was on 6 different medications. And then I got really into opioids and Oxycontin addiction, dabbled in heroin as well for over 6 years, spent most of my 20s in and out of 8 different rehabs and treatment centers. In the treatment centers, it was like a drug school, and I was prescribed hundreds of psychiatric medications, and got really, really addicted to drugs, up to 20 different drugs a day, just to be able to function, and was told I was never going to be able to live without these drugs, and that I was going to be an addict for the rest of my life. And I really believed that, and was quite the slave to drug addiction for 15 years. And I ended up being able to overcome addiction to all of these drugs, and really transform my life and become the happiest, healthiest, most vibrant, awakened version of myself through the intentional use of psychedelics.
So I imagine at some point you weren't in like an inpatient facility, and that's kind of when you were able to kind of take matters into your own hands a little bit. Can you talk about how you kind of chose to implement psychedelics and like what kind of support you maybe had?
Absolutely. So I decided that I wanted to get off of all of these psychiatric drugs, and came off of them through the use of, through the guidance of a doctor. However, with 2 of them, I cold turkey them improperly. And that put me into this debilitating withdrawal syndrome where I lost my ability to talk, walk, function. I lost my vision for over a year. I was completely debilitated. I had to get IV medicine just to be able to eat. I was just completely a vegetable at that point, and almost died from getting off of these psychiatric drugs. And I went to a treatment center for help, and they had no idea how to help me, because most people are, they know how to put people on these medications, but they don't know how to take people off of them. And they also don't know what happens when you are on these drugs for, over a decade, and the long-term impacts they have. And my doctor had no idea how to help me. These treatment centers didn't know how to assist me. So I really had to, take this into my own hands. And I'm actually really grateful that it happened that way, because I believe that that's what fueled me with the strength and empowerment to heal myself. And I told a friend of mine that I was, really suffering as much as I was. And he had been working with ayahuasca for many years, and he brought me into an ayahuasca ceremony, and it produced more withdrawals. So it definitely expedited the withdrawal syndrome that I was experiencing. But after that first ceremony, I remember ayahuasca said, "I'm going to show you a new way." And it was the first time in my life that I ever felt faith and hope that I was going to be able to live a life free of drug dependence. And that was profound for me, because this was back, over 8 years ago, and no one was talking about psychedelics for the treatment of addiction. I had no idea that it was going to help me so much, but it's been such a game changer in my recovery process.
That's amazing. And who are some people that you might want to acknowledge that like kind of had some impact on your kind of education and path here?
To where I am today?
Specifically on this kind of recovery topic, yeah.
That's a great question. I think that Gabor Mate has been definitely a leader in this space, in all of his work with addiction, and really reframing how we view addiction outside of the disease model and the sick model, and really viewing it as a life process. I think his philosophies have helped open up my consciousness in ways that has been profound for me, because so much of the consciousness around addiction is that you're sick, there's something wrong with you. And I've really learned that, there's nothing wrong with us. I think addiction is a gift, a teacher, and a guide. And so Gabor Mate definitely played a role in helping me come to my own awareness and understanding of addiction. And yeah, just I always just have so much respect for Dr. Jim Fadiman, my colleague. You know, he popularized microdosing into the public consciousness. I remember approaching microdosing, going through my addiction recovery process and becoming aware of his work. And he definitely helped me feel like this path had a lot of strength and empowerment. And I just admire him so much for his ability to steward such a huge movement. You know, he's been dedicating his life to microdosing for such a long time, and he's such an inspiration to me in my work. So those are two people that I have, yeah, just a really deep respect for.
So, a couple friends who I'll party with on occasion sent me a couple podcasts the other day around. It felt like a bit of a perfunctory understanding of addiction. It was like a 101 from some Stanford psychiatrist that wanted to share. But she had her own experience with addiction that was really interesting and very different. And like you're saying, this is like a kind of a natural process in a way. Her addiction was to fiction erotica novels. And like she was just buying them nonstop, like Kindle 24/7 reading. And it was impacting her work and her family. And she like had some really interesting conversations about how something so mundane can also be somewhat similar to drug addiction. I don't think culture's there yet in like understanding that there is a huge similarity. So like a big one right now I hear a ton about is video game addiction for younger boys and maybe even girls at this point. And that's ruthless because the hits are like these devices are designed in a way to get you addicted, right? It's like by design, how do we addict these folks to these platforms and games and whatever it is? Like our phones, Facebook, etc., all do something similar. Have you had any thoughts about that? Like there's these kind of like weird new environmental situations that are kind of capturing us as well as potential substances too.
Absolutely. I think that we could get addicted to anything. We could get addicted to any type of behavior, especially social media, technology. And what I've learned is it's actually not about the substance, the behavior, the thought pattern. It's about what's leading it to begin with. And there's been this cultural conditioning I know that I was brought up in where having emotions or being a highly sensitive person or going through any type of emotional state that wasn't normal or good, was something that was bad and needed to be suppressed or needed to be numbed and soothed. And I think that I learned how to self-soothe. Like addiction saved my life, ultimately. It helped me find a way to regulate myself with all these emotions that I didn't have parental figures to help guide me through. So I think that people are attempting to self-soothe or self-regulate themselves through external forces like social media, like technology, and it works temporarily, but it also causes harm because it trains the nervous system and the body to rely on something external, and to, it's kind of like a disassociation from self, and then it buries these emotions deeper. So I get it. I understand why that's happening because we don't have a culture of healthy emotional processing to be able to understand and heal what's at the root of our suffering. So we externalize our behaviors and soothing coping mechanisms. It's kind of like having an adult pacifier.
Absolutely. And like a glass bottle of beer when somebody gets home from work, it feels exactly like that to me. It's like, okay, like that's what you're doing. And like, no shame, I guess, but it's like, let's get aware of it, I think is how I want to kind of picture a lot of this stuff. And how do we get aware? And often it's in community with a little bit of support and people that, want to show you care and compassion. So a lot of people, like there's this loneliness epidemic that kind of fuels this, and like a lot of kind of brokenish things in culture that are leading this. Like, how do you like to think about this loneliness problem?
I think it's probably the core of most of human suffering. And we've become estranged from our native ways of living in community, operating in tribe. And we're all living alone in our little isolated boxes. And it's fueling depression, it's fueling addiction, it's fueling anxiety, it's fueling disconnection with ourselves, with each other, with community, with the land, with the cosmos. And I think it's definitely one of the roots of addiction is isolation and loneliness. And that's why I'm such an advocate for the work that we do with psychedelic recovery, is bringing people home to themselves and community. And I think that's what can be so healing for people in terms of this psychedelic work, is that it's reconnecting ourselves with our souls and with each other in community, and having that support. We can't heal in isolation. We heal in community and connection with each other. And I think that oftentimes a lot of the psychedelic work is happening in isolation, and I definitely feel some concern around that. So I love to see these community-based healing models and ceremonies where people are connecting with each other and really connecting as community.
Love that. So yeah, let's dig into, at what point did you realize that you were kind of ready to start supporting other people and be active in a more serious way around psychedelics?
It actually wasn't a conscious decision. People started coming to me for help. So as I started healing my addiction with psychedelics, and I want to just be clear, it wasn't just one ayahuasca ceremony that totally turned the needle for me. I was diligently working with ayahuasca for many years, twice a month for years. And I worked with iboga. I worked with 5-MeO-DMT, microdosing psilocybin and LSD, doing a lot of integration work. I changed my environment, everything I was eating, my mindset. So there was a lot that I was doing to heal myself, heal my nervous system, and heal my brain after years of addiction. And I started attending the San Francisco Psychedelic Society meetings, where I started volunteering for the organization that I've now been the director of for almost 7 years. And I saw a need for there to be spaces where people were talking about addiction. And I created Psychedelic Recovery, which is a program that supports people either in active addiction or long-term recovery who are using psychedelics or interested in the application of psychedelics for interrupting addiction or supporting long-term recovery. So I started hosting these meetings and peer support groups, and people just started coming to me and sharing their stories with me, asking me for help or how I overcame my addiction with psychedelics. And I just started naturally, just sharing what was working for me and supporting people. And I would say that it, just started evolving from there. And then over many, many years of supporting thousands of people, I started developing my own practice and programs and, one-on-one coaching with people.
That's great. And it's largely in a coaching framework?
Yes, exactly.
Cool. Great. And tell us a little bit about PIR and psychedelic recovery, if you don't mind.
Absolutely. So Kevin Franciotti, who is my colleague, he developed Psychedelics In Recovery, which is PIR, and I developed Psychedelic Recovery. And PIR is a program where it's very similar to psychedelic recovery, but PIR is focused on people that use psychedelics in conjunction with the 12-step program. And psychedelic recovery is more of a harm reduction model. We have our own viewpoint of addiction outside of the 12-step framework for recovery. And Kevin and I are collaborating on many exciting projects together, including building a new conference focused on psychedelics for addiction recovery.
That's outstanding. Addiction is such a controversial space. Everybody thinks they have like a really good handle intellectually on it, and it's really just not true. Like, they've often been through some traumatic experience with family members or friends or even themselves maybe. And it seems like one of the only acceptable lenses for discussion around addiction is this 12-step framework. Can you talk a little bit about that kind of like 12-step dominance and like what like what limitations there might be there, or what like amazing benefits there are in 12-step that I might not be clued into?
Absolutely. And I want to give the disclaimer that I've done a lot of 12-step work, and most of the 12-step work was forced upon me in treatment centers. And if I didn't do the 12-step model, then I would get in trouble or kicked out of a program. So I didn't really have the best introduction to it. A lot of people find healing through the 12-step program. It works for a lot of people, and but it's not the only way. And I think it's really important that we view addiction recovery as a tree with many different branches and different pathways that people can approach their own healing process. And I think, some of the benefits of the 12-step program for people, the feedback that I hear from people is that there's a community of support in the fellowship. There's a framework to follow. People are able to access their higher power. There's a lot of benefits about going through the program. And yeah, I have a lot of respect for people that go through 12-step. For me, it just never worked for me. Outsourcing the higher power, I found that God was inside of me and all around me. And I don't think, our higher power is outside of us. And I want to make sure that I'm just being respectful, because, I don't want to put down a model that works for so many people. I just want to share more about, what works for me, and more of the model that I've created. And with psychedelic recovery, I view that addiction is a teacher, a guide, and ultimately a gift. And we don't believe that addiction is something that's wrong with us. We don't believe that it's a disease. The 12-step framework does say that addiction is a disease. And I think that's been perpetuated. The 12-step framework is perpetuated in hospitals and treatment centers and rehabs, and even court mandated. And I'm here to sort of update the existing model to a framework that really encompasses empowerment, that people can overcome their addiction. And it comes from that fuel and desire inside, and that there's nothing wrong with going through addiction, and that you're not going to be an addict for the rest of your life. This is just a temporary state of consciousness that you're going to be able to overcome. And in our group, we don't have to introduce ourselves as I am an addict, or, I'm always going to be an addict, because I don't believe that that's true. I don't identify as an addict anymore. I don't want to program my consciousness with that. I have overcome addiction. And I'm so grateful for addiction. I think because of my addiction, I'm here with you today. It's the best thing that ever happened to me. And I really want to empower people that come through our program and these groups to view addiction in that way. Because oftentimes I feel like people demonize their addiction, or think that, it's something to be ashamed of, or, something that's wrong with them. And I just really want people to view it as like, maybe that was the best thing that you could have ever done for yourself. Maybe that saved your life. And I also recognize that, addiction takes a lot of people's lives. But for those that are open to overcoming it, it's, it was your attempt to solve a problem. It was my attempt to try to feel normal in a body, in a state of consciousness that didn't feel normal. And I now view it in such a loving way. And, for anyone trying to overcome addiction or guide someone else to overcome addiction, the first step I say is to, thank your addiction. Put the drugs that you're addicted to on an altar and treat it as if it's a sacred medicine. Thank it, love your addiction. Love that this is this part of you as you let it go and free yourself from it. Yeah.
Can you expand on that? Like how does that work for you and some folks? Like, I like the positivity framing, because I think when we just constantly like do negative programming, self-programming to ourselves, like that can be quite harmful. But courts, the court mandated aspect always kills me, by the way. But yeah, like what is it about like this positive framing that you think is really helpful?
I think because so much of addiction becomes an identity for people. Like, I am an addict. I believed that I was going to be an addict for the rest of my life. And my identity became so consumed by that. My whole day was spent finding Oxycontin, using Oxycontin, and, selling drugs to get more drugs. The whole day was centered around that. And then the next day, how am I going to get more drugs? My entire identity was encompassed in that. And then going to these psychiatrists for 12 years of my life, I was told I had all these mental illness things wrong with me, and that I needed to take these drugs to be able to mitigate, and manage that. And so I believe that I programmed my consciousness with addict consciousness, and that's ultimately been one of the most difficult things to heal over time. Like, even though I've released addiction to all of these drugs, I think there's still these belief systems in there. And so I think reframing addiction as not an identity, but as a coping mechanism or an action is really healing for people, because then they're like, wait, who am I beyond addiction? What do I get to create here? What do I desire? What do I like? What is my role in society? And, I think that overcoming addiction can lead us to our purpose on this planet, the purpose of being the healthiest, happiest version of ourselves, to helping people overcome addiction. I think that I became so identified with addiction and then viewed it as so bad and wrong that I started internalizing that as I'm bad, I'm wrong. And so to help people heal from that, I think it's, reframing addiction is the best thing that ever happened to you. So you don't feel like you spent 15 years of your life wasting that. I think, viewing it as like your spiritual training program. Now I know how to help so many people because I spent 15 years in the darkest place that I could possibly go. That was like my PhD, that was my training program, was going through those years of addiction and in and out of all these treatment centers. Like, I believe that our deepest pain and suffering is the portal to our purpose on this planet. And so viewing it as that is so empowering, because it makes me feel like now I understand why I went through all that. And I want other people to be able to view it in that way, to view their history of addiction and their past and their suffering as fuel towards their purpose.
I like that. I was thinking about that recently, about like a lot of people spend a lot of their lives like just getting like cooked, like absolutely, beat up. And when they get to the other side of that, there's so much wisdom they can share if it's done well, right? And how do we support each other to figure out how to do this well? And it sounds like kind of that's what you're on, and that sounds great to me. Like, how can we get these people who have so much amazing lived experience to share and contribute in really, really great ways?
Exactly.
So one issue that I see regularly discussed is a friend of mine recently, had some problems, recently started 12 steps, started, secretly microdosing. Except now all the AA guys want to talk to him about microdosing, which is good. But it's a really interesting thing in that like all drugs are bad in AA except for bad coffee and cigarettes. Like, it's kind of a joke, right? Kind of a cliche, but it's also like there's a sense in which it's true. But it's like what is it about AA culture that's like not all that, let's call it 12-step culture, that's not all that interested in psychedelic healing?
Yeah. Thank you for bringing that into this conversation. So the philosophy around addiction treatment and the 12-step program is that your success is based on your total time in sobriety. And sobriety is defined as total abstinence with drugs or behaviors that you're addicted to. And I believe that approach is actually quite limited, because I have clients that have been in the 12-step program for over 30 years, and they're like, I can promise you I'm not going to have another drink tomorrow, but I can't promise you that I'm not going to blow my head off. And is that how we're defining success, is being, and not saying that everyone that goes through the 12-step program is like this, but I think it's important that we sort of look at what is success. For some people, that's total abstinence. For other people, they want more than that. And I think that some people can learn how to integrate substances in a healthy way while still being sober and still being, liberated. And to me, the goal is not just about total sobriety. It's about liberation and freedom and happiness and joy and living a life on purpose, with intention. And so with psychedelic recovery, we practice targeted abstinence, which means that we abstain from the substances, behaviors, thought patterns that are harmful to our lives, but we allow for healing medicines, healing behaviors, and thought patterns to be a part of our recovery. And it takes more consciousness. For some people, they might not feel comfortable addressing that. I think that's one of the downsides to the total abstinence approach, is because you're taught that you can never have a healthy relationship with substances. You're taught to not trust yourself. And to me, it's like, it's not about being one step away from a relapse. I'm not worried about that, because I've healed and evolved so much that going back there would mean going to sleep. And I'm not going to do that. I don't want to go back to being that miserable person. And that's what I really want to teach people, is that it's not about being, afraid of relapse. It's about saying, I want to evolve so much that the thought of even going back to my addiction, isn't even a question, because I'm in such a better place in my life. So, the pathway for people to get there is multidimensional, and it takes, there's not one size fits all. And I just want to honor that for some people, total abstinence is the way to go. For other people, it might mean moderation or, slowly evolving out of their use and, having a certain relationship with psychedelic substances. But that can be a tricky slope for some people. So that's where I think having a community of support and frameworks and guidance around integrating psychedelics in recovery is really important. And to not use psychedelics in the same way that we used harmful and addictive substances, using them with intention and using them to help us become the best versions of ourselves, but not, escaping ourselves or trying to run away from ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I like that. Is there anything you've discovered yet around how to identify people that are going to do better than others in this kind of framework? Who's your ideal people?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I love that question. I've encountered people that are still giving their power away and thinking that psychedelics are going to be the silver bullet or the magic bullet, not wanting to do any integration work. And to me, the ideal person is open, willing to do whatever it takes to evolve, willing to put in the work, recognizing that if we were to view the psychedelic process of healing as 100%, the journey work is only 20%. The 40% is prep, 40% is integration, and people that are really open to doing anything that it takes. Someone that is committed to facing their darkness, because as we know, the psychedelic experience is not all bliss and joy. It's really having the courage to go into the shadow and the parts of ourselves that we've been running away from. And that's exactly what it is for healing addiction. It's about facing everything that we were running away from that led to our addiction in the first place. And for some people, that can feel really overwhelming. And that's why a lot of relapse can happen after psychedelic experiences, because so much of the darkness starts coming up for people and they've conditioned themselves to run away from it. And they're just not ready to face that or not willing to do that work. So, people that are coming to this work with the acknowledgement that this is about reciprocity with the medicine as well, not just looking at the medicine as what can I get from this, but how can I give and receive to this relationship? And, people that are just completely willing to transform all aspects of themselves and, and not looking to the medicine to do all of that work for them. And in terms of microdosing, for example, we'd like to say that microdosing is like riding an electric bike, and you have to be the one to pedal and be a participant in that process, and the microdosing can expedite that process with you.
Well, thanks for bringing up microdosing. So you've got this program. We've been curious about microdosing for a while. We have our own much smaller program than what you've got around microdosing. And I think, and with Adam, by the way, but I think like there's something interesting about microdosing in that there's like, for whatever reason, so much controversy around it. And I'm not really, so I haven't been following as closely as I would like microdosing specifically. My framework around this stuff is, it might be helpful for some people. It's like, based on my reading as a non-physician, it seems safer than trying SSRIs. So like, why wouldn't we try something that's safer first, that might work? And like the data from SSRIs is kind of like not all that compelling. And if we look at a lot of the case reports out of microdosing, some of these are really damn compelling, from chronic pain to creativity to addiction support. So like, since you're so deep in it, where do you like to say like the best evidence lives around microdosing? Because I remember last year it just was so toxic to talk about this online. And I think like we've kind of stabilized a little bit as a culture, a psychedelic culture, I suppose. But how do you like to think about this?
I'm so curious about the toxicity that you encountered with that. Before I answer that, would you be open to sharing what you experienced there?
There's so many people with extreme opinions about the lack of data, lack of firm data. Like, I agree that the data isn't as mature as I would like, but I could say that about all of psychedelia. We haven't had like a really great clinical trial yet. There are studies underway that are great, but like due to the lack of that, people would absolutely say like there's no way that microdosing helps because there's no data. Like there's no, like, absolutely ignoring anecdotal evidence, which is something that always drives me a little crazy, but it's kind of the culture we live in. So I guess I have to accept it a little bit. But it's something that is, it's still there, right? Unless we have really, really, really great data, there's certain people that are going to be, quite rude and quite not willing to learn from anecdotal stories or, lower quality data sources to make informed guesses. Like, there's pretty clear data from what I understand on a published paper about microdosing, I think with LSD,
Exactly.
decreasing pain. I think it was a cold pressor study maybe, but like, I think there is some really interesting stuff there that we need to dig into more. And people were just quite rude, and it was mostly around lack of firm published papers that like really say X, but again, that's coming. It'll get there. But how do you like to deal with that?
It is. Yeah, I actually love this because one of our amazing faculty teachers at the microdosing facilitator training is Dr. Connor Murray, PhD, and he pioneered the first clinical microdosing study at UCLA, and he's completely proven that it is not a placebo and that there is brain function, and that microdosing triggers the BDNF. And he even compared microdosing LSD with cannabis and methamphetamine and showed that it impacts a different part of its brain and that it works and that there is proof that microdosing is not a placebo. So it's, I think that there's a lot of information out there in terms of questioning it. I think, what I'm learning about the research is that it's limited right now because they don't want to send people home with microdosing. And it's limited because having someone come in multiple times a week to do a clinical microdosing study is not something that they're as much interested in. I believe it's in New Zealand. There's actually a study happening where they're sending people home with the microdosing and doing a study that way. And I know that that's what they're wanting to try to do in the US with the clinical studies. Dr. Connor Murray, who's been pioneering this LSD research, he's amazing. And he says that microdosing is, safer than a cup of coffee. And both him and Dr. Jim Fadiman believe that pretty soon we're going to view microdosing as actually just a traditional dose, like a regular dose, and the larger doses is going to be overdosing. And so I'm really excited to see where the research is going to go in terms of how we're viewing microdosing in the future as more of the regular dose versus just being a micro, and all the focus being on macrodosing. So that's why I feel so excited about the program that we're offering. I think that microdosing is such an accessible tool for people. I think it's an incredible tool, as you mentioned, to interrupt addiction, for anxiety, depression, for personal growth, for creativity, to become the best versions of ourselves, for human optimization, for neuroplasticity, or neurogenesis. There's so many different applications of microdosing, and it's a really accessible way to integrate these powerful tools into our lives in an ongoing way, and in an accessible way for populations of people. Like, not everyone is going to need or want to take a huge psychedelic experience. Other people are going to want to be able to integrate microdosing into their lives and into their protocol, and we need support in order to do that for a lot of different people. I'm excited to where the research is right now. I think that Dr. Connor Murray is really one of the most amazing pioneers in the space. I have so much respect for the work that he's doing. The future is in microdosing, and I'm excited to see, as more research comes online in this field of microdosing, our understanding of it and where it goes.
I love that. Thank you. I'm personally planning a couple of overdoses pretty soon. So I used to be a little snarky about microdosing. It's like, why? Meh. Like, you can just take more, but like, really, you can't be doing this all the time. Like, it's not really okay to be doing psychedelics, like even really weekly at bigger doses. Like, you really have to space it out and know yourself. But yeah, microdosing, I was microdosing LSD. I got mentioned in Vice a couple times about this, and I personally just had a hard time going to sleep. I can go to sleep fine on psilocybin microdoses, but LSD, it was just too much. So I think people also need to do a bit of self-discovery, right? Like, what works for them and their nervous system and body. Anything you want to add there?
Absolutely. I think, it's not one size fits all. And there's so many different aspects of the experience that are going to impact different people and at different phases in their lives. And I think, we can give frameworks for things and we can have education around it, but ultimately it comes down to someone's personal experience with something, to be able to understand how to work with it and how to build a healthy relationship with it.
Mm-hmm. And the only thing that I want to see some really good research on, and I'm very pro drug here, being the Psychedelics Today person. And this will sound a little bit like I'm not, but this topic of VHD, have you heard of this one? Mm-hmm. Through potential, can you share that story and your thinking on this VHD topic?
The valvular heart disease?
Yeah.
Yeah. From my understanding, there was some concern around this because of that repeated use of LSD was concerned to have a risk for valvular heart disease because of another medication being caused in a similar way. And we asked Dr. Connor Murray about it, and he's not at all concerned with the valvular heart disease and microdosing LSD.
Cool. Yeah. Just so people are clued in, this is where theoretically heart valves could thicken. But the data, there's no real data to suggest this. It's just a similar receptor site to fen-phen. Fen-phen was the cause of some deaths of some high profile people. And it was through this mechanism, but they were taking gigantic doses of fen-phen. We're taking tiny doses of psilocybin, LSD, or whatever else it is. And the history of use of psychedelics is pretty broad, and we haven't seen this yet. For me, I would have taken a sample of Grateful Dead people that, lifetime consumption, 600 doses of LSD or more. And Like, let's look at your hearts and compare it to another group. And like that seems very easy, but I expect that this would have shown up in particular in somebody like Amanda Fielding, right? Like, she's fine. It just seems like she's totally fine. So I like to bring it up because the skeptics always bring it up, and I like to deflate it a little bit, because I haven't seen any evidence that suggests that we need to be worried yet.
Yeah. And so does the research to back that. Yeah.
Yeah. There was a story that Robin Carhart Harris shared with me about very heavy MDMA users in UK having some of that, but again, very heavy, like the kind of user where you're like, you probably should stop. And I think that's probably big in the UK rave scene, but I have no experience there, but that's just a guess. But we're not talking about microdosing MDMA. I don't really think that's an appropriate thing to do usually. Actually, do you have a perspective on microdosing MDMA? You're the...
Not appropriate. Yeah. I think that, MDMA should not be microdosed, and that MDMA has a threshold dose of, around 80 milligrams. And it's way too high risk of a profile of a substance to be microdosed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, agreed. It's yeah. I remember being on stage with some folks in Denver a bunch of years ago, and somebody was talking about repairing their brain damage by microdosing MDMA, and I was like, oh wow, that's really crazy. And this is when I was like deep in my like way over the line use cycle with MDMA, which can happen to some people, and it's like, I would never recommend microdosing MDMA or small doses of MDMA. And I think even in the clinical trials, like MAPS was seeing that if the dose was too low, they actually had a negative impact on the individual.
Exactly.
So there's published data there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that was some of the concern too around the trials, was that there was a recommendation to compare it to those lower doses. And, but it was found that it can produce a lot of negative symptoms within the low dose. So I think that, there's so many other beautiful substances that can be microdosed, and MDMA is just not one of them.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned a interesting story before we rolled here that I want to hear more about. You've had some experience with family members with psychedelics. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes. So as a teenager, just rolling back the tape, Dad's a doctor. He's a cancer doctor at Stanford, and he, sent me to the psychiatrist. They didn't know how to help me back when I was really suffering, saw me go through 15 years of drug addiction, saw me go through all these treatment centers, be put on hundreds of psychiatric medications, and he really believed in that system. And I think he started questioning the rehabs, because they would tell me, that they would tell him as a dad, like, hey, your daughter's going to be sick for the rest of her life and addicted for the rest of your life, and she has to take these pills for the rest of your life. And they would tell him that 1/3 of people get better, 1/3 of people don't, and 1/3 of people keep coming back to rehab. And he's like, that's it. Like, we just have to keep getting worse or keep coming back here. And when I decided to take my power back and get off of all these drugs, he was terrified and definitely wasn't supportive at first. It kind of questioned his whole reality. My dad's reality is to put patients on medications. That's what they do. Those are the tools that they have. And so seeing me be, dependent on all these tools and deciding to come off of all of them, question his own framework and programming. But he drove me to my first ayahuasca ceremony and supported me in my integration. And I just remember, telling him as I was integrating the ayahuasca over the years, like, wow, I feel like I'm finally getting better and I'm finally healing myself. And I started sending him articles and podcasts and and sent him Michael Pollan's book when it came out. And that really turned the needle for him. And when I started organizing ayahuasca retreats in Peru with Brazilian tribes like the Yawanawa and the Huni Queen, and my dad came on the retreats with me. And he started working with ayahuasca, and it was just
Wow.
a profound experience. Like ayahuasca was one of his first psychedelics, and he came on the
Okay.
you too.
Yeah.
He came on the retreat to support me, and he left. His life was changed, and he had his first time his first experience with a mystical experience, and he's like, now I get it, now I understand. And he came back a second year in a row to the ayahuasca retreat. He sat with ayahuasca during COVID. He's done it at least 6 times now. We did our first microdosing session together. He's super open to psychedelics. He even gave a presentation at Stanford to all of his colleagues about ayahuasca, and tried to organize a private retreat with his colleagues and me. So he's become quite the psychedelic advocate, and he's probably one of my most supportive people in my life. Super supportive of my work, comes to all my events in the Bay Area around psychedelics, is sending me articles. My 99-year-old grandmother is sending me articles on psychedelics. Like, I've really made an impact on my family. And I think that that's what this work is all about. You know, it's healing our lineage. And I remember being in the ayahuasca ceremony with my dad, and he started reliving all of the trauma that we went through. And in the ceremony, he started crying, and I've never seen my dad cry. And he just held me and he said, "I'm sorry." And it was the most profound experience that I've ever had to hear that from him. And then I said, "I'm sorry." And we just held each other in ayahuasca. So it was incredibly healing for my lineage, for my relationship with my dad. Like, psychedelics definitely healed that aspect for us, that aspect of, you know, addiction is a family problem. And my dad even says it now. He's like, this is not just about something wrong with, you know, the addicted person. It's a whole family issue. And, you know, having him participate in this healing work has just been such a game changer for our relationship, and so healing. We're in the best place we've ever been in our relationship. And I have such a respect for him coming from his background to come to the altar, you know, and really surrendering to these sacred medicines and surrendering his framework for how he understands healing and being open to the native ways. It's incredibly powerful. And I wish for all families that they get to experience this healing work together.
Yeah. Thanks for that. And I had a friend a while ago, I think it was at the MAPS conference in 2017 in Oakland, and this friend talked about some sort of psychedelic retreat. I think they were doing mescaline isolate, and he was with his father, and they had a really interesting kind of energetic experience where it was kind of like a passing of the torch moment, it seemed like. And like that story has stuck with me for so long, because it feels like a family lineage story. It also feels a little bit like a rite of passage experience as well. But one that kind of happened spontaneously. It reminded me a little bit of your story, so I wanted to kind of share that.
Oh, I love that. That's so beautiful.
Have you seen other kind of people doing family healing in this way?
I've heard of some stories. Some friends have been using these medicines with their family members. It's quite rare, but I definitely have a couple friends that have experienced it, and it's been profound for the families that have been through the most hardship together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, a lot of families have been through a lot of hard stuff, so I think there's a lot of value there. What have we missed? We have a little bit of time left. I want to make sure we include everything that you want to hit here.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that I just want to empower people, you know, anyone that's listening to this, that they have the power to reclaim their lives, And if anyone is struggling with addiction, I'm here for you. I want people to know that they're not alone and that they're so powerful. They're more powerful than any addiction. And, any state of consciousness that people are currently at, they can overcome and they can evolve. And for people that are on medications like I was, taking handfuls of pills just to function. All of these medications were prescribed by a doctor. There's another way, and people don't have to accept a state of suffering as a long-term life sentence of drug dependence. There is an off-ramp, and I really want to empower people that's possible. If I can do it, you can do it. I have every confidence in anyone that they can do it. And I'm really passionate about educating doctors and clinicians and practitioners how to integrate psychedelics into their education. Like, as clinicians take an ethical pledge to be able to support their patients. And more often than not, I hear that people, come and tell their doctor that they want to microdose, and the doctor just says, I don't know what to do with that, and turns a blind eye. And so I think that's where our program with microdosing education plays such a big role, because we're not training people to be guides. We're not training people to give their patients medication or, illegal substances. We're saying, hey, people are going to be doing this. So how do we empower you as a practitioner to safely help them as they're going through the microdosing experiences? And I think that's such a game changer for mental health, because we're empowering practitioners and clinicians and executive coaches with the resources to support their clients so that they don't have to turn a blind eye, and really help people that choose to decide to work with these medicines on their own. And I'm also, I think that a lot of the current care that we have for people in addiction recovery, there's a lot, it's not working. We need other options. And, it can be accessible for people to do this on their own with support, and I really want to help people that are already supporting other people and guiding other people with the resources to support their clients, so that people aren't causing more harm to their clients. And I think that's the role that we play, just like Vital and just like these other training programs, is, providing that ethical education for practitioners to create beautiful healing experiences for their clients. And I'm really grateful for the work, and just to see the ripple and the fractal of impact that's going to create on the world.
That's beautiful. Are you going to any conferences in the near future, next year, psychedelic conferences or events? Absolutely.
Well, let's see. I am going to be presenting at the Los Angeles Psychedelic Symposium in October, and then Earth Star Festival coming up. And I just applied to speak at South by Southwest with Kevin Franchiotti and Zach Leary and Marlena Robbins on a panel focused on breaking through addiction with psychedelics. And definitely going to be at the MAPS conference in 2025. And I'm excited for all the psilocybin conference I'll be presenting at as well, the online conference. And excited for all the upcoming amazing events in the psychedelic space. And then, of course, Kevin and I are producing our online conference, Psychedelics for Addiction Recovery, which is going to be launching in 2025. And that will bring together... it's the first ever online conference focused on psychedelics and addiction. We're bringing together researchers, personal stories, and practitioners people that have healed themselves, interrupted addiction through the intentional use of psychedelics, as well as highlighting the amazing work that's happening in the research front and in the clinical atmosphere to empower families, individuals, and practitioners how to safely and ethically integrate psychedelics into addiction recovery.
Outstanding. I love it. And it's high time. We need it. And thank you for understanding the problem going through it yourself so you can understand it even better, and then working to fix it. Like, this is a really big problem. There's a lot of like predatory folks in the recovery rehab space. There's a lot of people with really good intent as well, but they don't have the information yet. And once they have the information, and perhaps experience it themselves, then let's hope people can get better sooner.
Exactly.
Back to their lives and families.
Yeah, exactly. And that's part of our intention with the microdosing facilitator training. Is it's really the first program in the world that educates people how to help their clients interrupt addiction through the use of microdosing, as well as supporting people who decide to wean off of psychiatric drugs through, using microdosing as a tool to support that process, and empowering practitioners with the ethical skills and knowledge to understand how to support people through that process. Because it's a big process, and there's not really a framework for how to do that in terms of, what I've seen in my own personal healing journey. So, I'm just really excited about all the work that you're doing. Thank you so much for the work that you guys are doing at Psychedelics Today and Vital. We have such a deep respect for everything that you've done over many, many years. And I'm really grateful to share my work here today and be colleagues on this beautiful sacred path together.
Yeah, likewise. It's really great. And we need so many more people. So I'm glad we're setting the groundwork for it. So where can people find your work? Like, what kind of websites would you like to send folks to?
So people can find me at microdosingfacilitatortraining.com, psychedelicsocietysf.org, and psychedelicrecovery.org. And I'm also on Instagram at Connect with D, Danielle Nova on LinkedIn. And I'll have my new website soon, daniellenova.com.
Oh boy. I can't wait to see that. I'm sure it's going to be super nice. So, all right. Well, thank you so much for being here today. And I hope we can do it again in the future.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to share on your beautiful platform. And I'm just inviting anyone that this information resonated with. I would love to meet you. I'd love to know you. And just reminding everyone in the audience that you are so powerful, and, just honoring everyone for all that they've been through in their lives to get them to this moment of time. And I'm really, really thrilled to activate this sacred work, and wishing you a beautiful day.